Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 106 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Got Joe Meade with me, too, and tonight we are recapping week 4 in the Big Ten in football. Joe, we had a couple of conference games. Both of our teams probably the biggest winners of the week. But for me, this is, we're starting to see some real things happen now. I think we're a third of the way through the regular season. And I think we're starting to find how these teams really might line up against each other.
Yeah, Sean, I completely agree with you. I think now that each team has played at least one conference game, especially in our conference, I think you're kind of seeing classes form. I think we all had an idea of what the upper class was, maybe the lower upper class and the upper middle class. We needed some more clarity on, and we're still going to need some more throughout the rest of this month, which is one more Saturday and then October. But I think we know where things stand, at least where teams start off at. Now, that doesn't account for improvement. That doesn't account for major injuries, which, by the way, we've had plenty in all of college football, not just the Big Ten. So I think that's going to be something I'll have to caveat it with, but definitely seeing the classes form. That would be my overall takeaway from this weekend.
All right, Joe, well, let's get into the games. Let's start in New Jersey on Friday night. We had Iowa and Rutgers go at it in Piscataway, and the Hawkeyes take a 38-28 victory. Certainly a lot more points than we could have expected. It was Rutgers that got out to the lead at the end, 14-7. It was 14-14 at the end of the first quarter. Um, Iowa kept matching Rutgers. Rutgers takes a fourth quarter lead, and Iowa scores 2 touchdowns in the last 6 minutes to get a 10-point victory. Mark Gronowski, obviously a threat on the ground. Moulton comes in, their running back. He was injured and limited in early action for them. But it's Iowa that gets the win and improves to 3-1, while Rutgers falls to 3-1. So Joe, Iowa, obviously you have to be impressed with them a little bit, and another missed opportunity for Rutgers.
What's funny, Sean, is even in spite of the score, and you look at that and figure, how could you call this a typical Iowa win? In a way, it had a lot of the same characteristics. Huge special teams play to start the game by Caden Wetchin, and just stop kicking to him. I saw UMass do it twice. I see Rutgers do it. They even had the guts to do it at the end of the half. Now, he made the mistake of not stepping out of bounds at the 25, and Iowa probably could have kicked a field goal or attempted one there. But yeah, I just telling teams stop kicking him the ball because he's such a danger. Offensively, I think this is really what you wanted to see out of Iowa's offense. Now, 12 of 18, 186 yards, 0 TDs doesn't really pop out for Gradowski, but I think the threat he posed on the ground really confused Rutgers. I think Rutgers' defense has struggled a lot of the year, and Iowa, good on them for giving them a lot of things to think about. Whether it was Gradowski running certainly in the air, and then even Kamari Bolton, although a bit limited, I thought he had an effective enough game. And Sean, I don't even think this was necessarily the masterclass I expected out of Phil Parker. I thought Anthony Kaliakmanis had a lot of success, but Phil Parker made him make the fatal mistake, that tip pass toward the end of the game, went down a score, getting picked off there. And I think Rutgers' big plays were shocking, but they held their ground game relatively in check. And Sean, one last thing before I give the floor to you for Iowa is they're making the small plays, and this is what Kirk Ferentz has been hailed for. I know it's been a rough few weeks ever since the Iowa State loss, but I think he kind of silences the whisper. I mean, maybe not whisper, silences the voices for now. Uh, I didn't expect them to win this game. I know they were slightly favored, but really good on Iowa. I think Rutgers is still probably a bowl eligible team. I think Anthony Kaliakmanis has really come on, and I just think Iowa, it's that kick return play and that interception, and I think that's just how Iowa's won games in the past decade, and it's going to continue to do so when they're playing teams of equal talent.
This is the Iowa formula. It's not going to change until they change their program, and that's not happening at least anytime soon by the looks of it. I think we said it would probably come down to a turnover or a special teams play. Iowa gets both in their favor, and that's why they win by 10. I mean, it was a pretty even game the whole way. Both teams were winning. Rutgers had 2 leads. Three leads, sorry, and Iowa had a lead obviously to start the game. They got the lead again, surrendered it, and then obviously got it at the end. But really back and forth game, and it's unfortunate for Rutgers. It seems like this game is a is a jumping spot for them. They've had this game every year since we've started doing this, Joe, and they've never won it. Whether it's to get them into that maybe upper part of the Big Ten, and unfortunately for them, they don't get the job done here. Iowa does. Iowa's Iowa. I think that's the big takeaway here. They are probably going to win a game that they shouldn't this year. And they're probably going to lose one that they shouldn't because one of these crazy special teams plays is going to happen the other way, and they're not going to have built up a big enough lead to sustain that. But the only surprising thing here was the points. Both offenses look pretty solid. I think both defenses probably don't look as solid, and that could potentially be a problem for them down the road. But we'll have to see where these teams lie in our power rankings, which we will do probably after week 5, because I don't know if either of these teams have really shown us anything that we didn't see coming going back to the beginning of the season.
100% agree, Sean.
All right, Joe. Well, let's move on to Saturday. Um, I I don't know if this is in the correct order or not because one of them includes my favorite team. But let's start with the Oregon State Oregon game in Eugene. The Beavers lose 41-7. They dropped to 0-4. What a tough couple years they've had since Jonathan Smith went to Michigan State. Not a Pac-2 podcast, but they are not the team that they once were. And it's Oregon, business-like. They come in there. Dante Moore looks really good. He throws for another 4 touchdowns. He gets his playmakers the ball. And Oregon makes quick work of a team here that they should have.
Yeah, Sean, I kind of like with Oregon. You can't really comment much on their games because they leave like zero room for much criticism or error. I mean, Oregon State 0-4 speaks for itself. They're not a good football team. I don't think anyone at Oregon State would argue with that fact. This was just an overmatching game, kind of a game I'll look at as if like when a Big Ten team plays Kent State or something, just not really going to be taken with the highest degree of certainty. Certainly, we'll be talking about Oregon plenty soon. So, Duck fans, Duck listeners, I know on Spotify and some of my Instagram comments, you kind of not been happy. We haven't discussed you a lot, but I promise it's coming. We're going to be playing plenty of important games, obviously this week and then come October, November. I certainly don't think Oregon is going to be the least talked about team on this podcast.
It'll have to. Oregon's really good. I think they're in a great spot to make the college football playoff, but are they going to be hosting a game in the first round, or are they going to be a national championship threat? I think that's really the only thing that we don't know the answer to with Oregon yet. We know they score a lot of points, but how does their defense fare against a really elite offense? Obviously, they've given up almost no points this year, but they have played Northwestern, a team that's expected to be at the bottom of the Big Ten, Oklahoma State, who just fired their coach a couple hours ago, and Oregon State, who, without a home, would be at the bottom of any other power league. But certainly, it's Penn State on the road, bye, and then Indiana at home. So a big, big 3 weeks for the Ducks. All right, Joe, up next on the list is Illinois and Indiana here. Don't know if this was chronologically correct, but we're going to roll with it. Indiana 63, Illinois 10. The Hoosiers make quite the statement as they take down Brett Bielema, Luke Altmaier, and the Fighting Illini. Joe, not sure how much you caught of this one because you were obviously on site in Lincoln, but this is exactly what Indiana needed to do to get people to take them a little bit seriously this year.
I just thought them winning the game would get people to take them seriously. Anyone who doesn't take them seriously clearly didn't watch the game, clearly didn't look at the box score, clearly didn't look at the highlights because scoreboard to box score, this was a total bleep whooping. I was completely shocked. Indiana had superiority at both lines of scrimmage, both offensive and defensive side. Illinois, by all metrics, was a good team, Sean. I don't know about the top 10 ranking. That's why I always left them out of my CFP rankings. But what I'll tell you is, objectively, this was an upper tier Big Ten team. And if we're going to go off that fact, Indiana slaughtered them. Mendoza, I could talk, and I know you'll talk about his performance. It's just a line of scrimmage to me that speaks. Illinois got like two 2 yards or somewhere above that a carry. It wasn't much above that if it was. Um, 12 of their 13 rushes, I think, were stuffed like completely. So they couldn't get anything going offensively. I think Brett Bielema, like that, kind of in the hunch motion, like the tired MJ motion, certainly nothing to do with MJ there because probably the biggest loser of the week in college football, besides a Billy Napier or Mike Gundy. So brutal look for Illinois, but I do think Indiana is for real. Illinois can redeem itself this week, and we'll talk about that later. But Indiana's for real. The weapons they have, the pass rush, they're good at the lines. I don't think they have any like first round talent picks. Maybe Mendoza could be one, Surratt, but I do think they have just by committee. The depth is there, and at least the starting depth is very good. Now injuries happen and whatnot, but Indiana should certainly be taken seriously as a CFP threat. I'm gonna say maybe not as the prominent Big Ten threat, but I think they should be above that dark horse status we've talked about.
A couple things for Illinois. They were down their top corner coming into their in this game, and then Malik Scott gets hurt in this game. He's their signal caller on defense, and then they have another big player for them get ejected for targeting. So they were certainly up against it defensively anyway, and of course Indiana as an offense, I think we expected them to be pretty good this year. Obviously, it sort of avalanched, and Indiana just kept scoring. But I think a lot of Indiana fans were very excited about this team, saying that they might be more talented than last year. And I think people are starting to believe that now. You talk about the players that Indiana lost, whether it was to the NFL draft or just graduation, they replaced those players with really high-quality players. They get Pat Coogan at center from Notre Dame, Mendoza, obviously. They C.J. West on the 49ers. They bring back Kamara. They get defensive upgrades in the transfer portal. So this team last year, Joe, I don't think really wanted to get into line of scrimmage battles. I think this year they might want to. They continued to run the ball at a crazy rate, even when the game was over, and with their second and third linemen and running backs. But this was obviously a clear statement. I do think Illinois is still in the top 25, but Indiana, the ceiling might be a little bit higher than we thought. And at the end of the day, the style points in this one might come into play. We talked about Indiana's schedule. Are they in with 2 losses? Are they in with 3 or 1 loss? This sort of win, teams can luck into wins at home against another good team. This wasn't that. This was a total throttling, and I think the country needs to adjust their expectations of Indiana a little bit because they don't look like they have a real weakness on this team. Now, they're not elite in every aspect. The secondary still has some problems, but they've got plenty of NFL players on this team, and certainly the expectations might adjust a little bit this week for the Hoosiers.
1000%, Sean. And maybe Illinois is that bad, but even if they are that bad, 63-10, any Big Ten opponent with competent talent and coaching should not be dismissed.
I don't think they are. I mean, I think they were 9-3 last year.
Yeah.
Played South Carolina in the bowl. I don't think they're worse than that.
No.
I think they're a better team than last year. They were in the top 25, and they stayed in the top 25 even after this. So they obviously have a big one next week. That'll be a different video. But Joe, next up on the sheet here is your Michigan Wolverines. They go on the road to Nebraska and win 30-27. That scoreline is a little bit deceiving. Michigan was in control pretty much the whole way. And if not for a rather unfortunate Hail Mary right before halftime and a late garbage time touchdown with a minute and a half left, this scoreline would have looked a lot better. But on the whole, this is sort of exactly what you were looking for when it came to Michigan. Go on the road, beat a good team that you are still better than. And now I think Michigan can adjust their expectations a little bit for the rest of the season.
Yeah, Sean, this was kind of like the USC game last year in the sense that if you start 2-2, it's a really, really tough hole to climb out of. And frankly, maybe your playoff hopes are at probably single digit percentiles. Thank God it did not happen. Speaking as a Wolverine fan, just trying to be objective here. I'm going to start off with what Michigan did really well in comparison to the Oklahoma game. The defensive line finally got home. Now, you could argue Oklahoma's offensive line was superior. Certainly, Oklahoma's defensive line is superior to Nebraska's, who only has one guy, I think, that weighs over 300 pounds in the rotation. But just sticking on defense here, Sean, Derek Moore, Jay Sean Barham at edge clearly causes havoc. And I think Wick Martindale, I give him a lot of credit. He adjusted. He was a little too aggressive at the beginning, rushing 5-6. He just rushed 4 or 5 the rest of the game, and they got home.
It seemed like he was a step ahead in this game.
He was a step ahead, and I think the 7 sacks on Raiola speaks volumes. I know you could say, oh, a quarterback gets sacked 7 times like Lamar was on Monday night. Some of it's his fault. Maybe that's true, but all I'll tell you is Raiola broke a lot of tackles that would have been sacks too. And when he had time, he delivered in a clean pocket. So I don't think Nebraska should be too discouraged offensively. I think the run game, Michigan stuffed a lot of teams. They even had very good success against Oklahoma, even though Mateer ran wild on them. That's just a facet of Nebraska's offense they don't have, and I think that was a severe disadvantage for Nebraska. Going on the offensive side, Sean, Michigan, the 12 and 22 for Underwood's deceiving. He had 4 passes that were clear drops right in the hands of the receiver that any power 4 receiver should make, and one was for a clear touchdown. So not discouraged by his play at all, actually very encouraged by it, especially with the run game, the 30-yard TD run, the 2 runs he had on the final kind of like 8-minute, 46-second drive that kind of broke Nebraska's defensive will. And, all I'll say, Sean, is if it weren't for that stupid Hail Mary and the stupid like taunting penalty or whatever the heck that meant.
To give him the first down,
To give the first down and spot Nebraska an extra 3. Michigan definitely wins this game by 2 scores, and it looks a little more impressive. One last thing on Nebraska before I give the floor to you, Sean. I still think they're a good football team. Clearly, in year 3 of Matt Rule, I think they've progressed. You look at their next 4 games, I think they're very winnable. I think this performance would win them their next 4 games before they have to play that like USC at Penn State and Iowa gauntlet. So wouldn't be too discouraged for Nebraska. One thing I'll say, though, is Michigan's D-line's improved, but Nebraska's O-line, running game, and defensive line play against the run has to be a lot better before they play Michigan State in 2 weeks.
Yeah, this was one. I want to talk about the Hail Mary situation, Joe. You were obviously at the game, so you did not watch it on TV. But I don't know if there's ever been a moment where an announcer has been like humbled so quick. They could not stop criticizing how Matt Rule was dealing with that end of quarter, and then they just after what happened, they just completely flipped it. Then it was, how do you let them do that? Why don't you call the timeout? So it was really fun to watch as somebody who's done broadcasting before and talked about strategy, not in football, but it was really funny because it was the CBS crew. It was obviously 2 unbelievable announcers, Nestler and his partner, who I'm forgetting his name. Danielson. But obviously that is a big, big mistake for the Michigan coaching staff. I think for all the praise we've given them for the sort of tweak in game plan over the last 2 weeks, that could cost you a game. You have to call the timeout with 30-something seconds left to make them punt it. But they basically spotted him a touchdown there, and they still lost. But this is a double-digit win on another day for Michigan. I think their running game is really, really good. They've got 2 really good running backs, plus a quarterback who can run. I think we're going to see a lot of runs in the near future. And then I think there will be a time where Bryce Underwood will get a lot of one-on-one coverage, because there are teams that will just sell out and say, all right, if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us through the air. And obviously it's easier to do that when there's more people on the line. So I think Michigan fans, if they do run the ball a lot in the near future, I think that's going to be setting up some passing later in the year. But this was a good win. This is what you wanted. I don't think Nebraska played all that bad either. I just don't know if they're on that. They're not on that top 25 level yet. They're probably in this 8, 7, 8, 9 win range. Haven't. I mean, I have looked at their schedule, but don't have it off the top of my head. And Michigan, at least you got a chance now. You got a chance. You're back in the top 25 pretty comfortably, and you needed that big time. But Moore will come back next week, and we'll talk about that on our next video. But good win for the Wolverines. All right, Joe, down the list we go. One of the longest games in college football history because of a lightning delay. It was Notre Dame 56, Purdue 30. 3-hour delay at the end of the second quarter, and then when they came back, they didn't have a halftime. They finished the second quarter and started the third quarter immediately. It's a little bit of an odd situation there. This game for Purdue last year was one of their lowest moments, 66-0 or 66-7 loss. This year they do put up a little more fight. Coach Odom runs a really cool inside zone pitch back to the quarterback, and Ryan Brown scores. But at the same time, there are still levels to this. Notre Dame needed a win. They were 0-2 coming in. They have a great rushing attack too. They end up winning big time. But for a big loss, I think Purdue is seeing some progress here.
I think there's definite progress now. You could just say Notre Dame's defense stinks based on their first two performances against Miami and Texas A&M. I'm not going to go that hard. Chris Ash has been a phenomenal defensive play caller throughout his career, whether it was at Ohio State, Texas, you name it. So Purdue wise, I think this is just a game they're clearly overmatched. In a way, it's the extreme situation for Nebraska where they just don't have the horses to like Nebraska. I don't think had the horses to beat Michigan without playing a near perfect game, and kind of the same thing for Purdue here, just on a more extreme level. And to be fair, Purdue was always going to be their punching bag in this game. I thought Notre Dame would drop at least one of their first two games and kind of take out their frustration here, but it was double the frustration based on Notre Dame's uh, first two performances in their losses. So wouldn't look too far into it, Sean. I don't think I'm going to talk about it too much longer because on a macro scale in the Big Ten, I don't think this game's really going to matter much.
Yeah, just effort level was a lot better. That seemed to be the main takeaway from Purdue. Plenty of times they quit last year and would have lost this game 70-7. They didn't do that. 56-30 is not as ugly as it could have been, and I think they are these are the culture building games, right? Can you go into a game against a team that's definitely better than you and not quit? And they didn't. And obviously there were some fun offensive plays, and based on some of the teams that were, I think they might be a little bit of a tier above the bottom of this conference right now. And the bottom might be one or two teams, but they continue to play like that, they are going to win at least another game. We'll have to see what comes up next for Purdue. All right, Joe. We've got 3 more games. This is the latest one for sure, but it's next on ESPN here. Michigan State 31, USC 45. A lot of points like we predicted. And it was sort of the second scenario that I suggested. USC always a step ahead in this game. Michigan State just couldn't catch them. Game wasn't over per se, but USC was never really in a position to lose here. The Trojans' offense continues to put up a lot of yards, a lot of points. Jade Mayava really is starting to look like a good quarterback. Aiden Childs in Michigan State's offense keeps him in it probably longer than they should have, but at the end of the day, it was a 2-touchdown win for the Trojans, and they're in the top 25 now at 4-0. So impressed with this game. Sort of went the way that we expected.
Yeah, I don't think either team I look at as greater or lesser, if that makes sense. Like I didn't really get surprised by any of this. Without Jacoby Lane, one thing I'll say is USC impressed me. It didn't surprise me that a Lincoln Riley offense with plenty of really capable players like Wayman Jordan, uh, um, Eli Sanders, Makai Lemon, and obviously Jay Maeva, who might be a dark horse Heisman
Yeah.
contender. I'm saying that quietly because they haven't played a big game yet, so I'll hold that until for their judgment. I thought he did a really good job protecting the ball. I thought it did a really good job pulling and running, even though he only had 4 carries. I also thought Makai Lemon and him kind of made up for the fact Jacoby Lane was out because had they had him, I think this game could have been a little uglier. One thing I'll say about USC that's slightly concerning is I think Michigan State scored, even with the garbage time TD considered, scored a little too much in this game. That first drive, guys were streaking open. Deanne Tudlin did make adjustments, but I think it's also unfair to criticize at the same time because Aiden Childs and Michigan State's offense, I think, are very, very good. I just think the defense, quite frankly, shot is reaching Scotty Hazelton 2021, 2022 levels of unacceptable for Michigan State. They were clearly selling out to stop the pass, which was smart, but by doing that, especially without your best pass rusher, Jordan Hall, which was kind of a unfortunate call for the Spartans. They were just gashed by Jordan and Sanders throughout the game, and even if Michigan State scored 38 for real points without the garbage time, there was no way they were going to win this game because they couldn't get a stop.
Yep, both these teams I think have a similar path to victory in a game. I just think USC is a little bit of a level above Michigan State here, and how we'll find out how good USC is pretty soon. They've got 3 ranked opponents in their next 3 games, and then Michigan State, it's they're on the road at Nebraska after a bye week, so it's continuous improvement for them, right? Can you get to a spot where you're more confident with this team from last year? I think they are still on the way there. A road loss against a top 25 team where you sort of competed is not okay, but there a few changes here and you're right there. So don't think we learned a ton about either of these teams either here. We expected a lot of points. We expected a USC double-digit win, and that's what happened. All right, the Billy Edwards revenge game up next, Joe. Maryland 27, Wisconsin 10. Maryland is 4-0. Malik Washington, as a true freshman, is really starting to get a lot of attention for how good he's been so far. Edwards for Wisconsin, he tries to play, I think, a series maybe. He's clearly injured and should not have been in there. But Maryland gets a 17-point road win. Joe, before the season, Mike Locksley was under some pressure. They had underachieved a couple of seasons. It seems like he's found a really good quarterback, and they might be a little bit better than we expected. They are 4-0, granted 3 non-conference wins, and Wisconsin, who's expected to be near the bottom of the league. But I was really impressed with Maryland here. They thoroughly dominated a Wisconsin team on the road.
Before we get into the greater story that is Luke Fickell, I do, like Shaw, want to give Mike Locksley his flowers. I thought he was not dead to rights, but I thought he was a dark horse candidate to get fired. I'm sick of saying dark horse, so I'm going to really try to stop. Malik Washington, I don't think, 18 and 34, you look at that, you're not too impressed. It's just more the fact that he's not making horrible decisions with the ball. You don't love to see the minus 12 rushing yards with sacks and whatnot. One thing I do like seeing, this guy spreads the ball. Octavian Smith, Shalik Knotts, Jaleel Farouk. Maryland's always had very competent passing attacks with Mike Locksley. I think now that they have a freshman that's, I think, got a really good mindset, really confident with it. And, you know, maybe this is a Maryland team mold, not in a bad way, but a team that wins 7, 8 games because of their offense. And if their defense could just make a few plays, Maryland will be in and probably win a few games that you would expect them to. This is what I didn't expect them to win. I am not totally shocked, to defend myself, because Wisconsin's been so dreadful all year. And that's going to lead into this discussion, Sean. If I was to pick a candidate for a Big Ten coach to get fired next, Luke Fickell has got to be the top of everyone's sports book, if not for some like scandal or, God forbid, some health thing with some other coach. I think it's looking really bad for Barry Alvarez, that administration, and they have the bye week this week. If they get blown out of the water in the big house in 2 weeks, we'll talk about this later. That could be very bad. I know Billy Edwards got injured. That's really unfortunate. This team with Billy Edwards would probably be 2-2 shot. They don't run the ball all too well. They pass it okay, but the defense for a defensive coach like Luke Fickell is unacceptable. And the fan base, wavering out of there, chanting "Fire Fickle." That's a really ugly scene and a scene I hadn't seen in Badger football my entire life. They've been consistently pretty good to really good in my life. Never on that national title conversation, but always a conference title contender. And ever since the probably COVID year, post Jonathan Taylor, they've been really, really bad, and they've been slowly regressing as a program. I don't think this is all on Luke Fickle, certainly some of the administration, but he is definitely going to bear the heaviest burden of them all. So very bad for Wisconsin.
He This was a game where they just got punched in the mouth. It was 20 to nothing Maryland at halftime. And you know, from the looks of it on TV, it was an ugly scene in Camp Randall. And that's, this might be the turning point of the season for them in a bad way. And if Fickle does get fired, we're going to look back at this one and be like, all right, here's where they decide. Maybe they didn't fire him after this game because they didn't. It's Tuesday and he's still the coach. But this is where they made the decision that he will probably be gone. And I think Maryland is a team to look out for. Their schedule, Joe, they're going to win some games. They don't play any of Oregon, Penn State, or Ohio State this year. And they only have one road game against a ranked opponent in Illinois. They play UCLA on the road. They play Maryland, or they are Maryland. They play Nebraska, Washington, Rutgers. Like, there are some opportunities here to get to 6 wins, or maybe even more. And that's not what I expected. I think you were a little higher on them at the beginning of the season, but this is a good win for them.
1,000%.
All right, down we go to the Apple Cup in Washington. This one was in Pullman, and it was Washington that made the trip and brought home a lot of points, 59-24. They improved to 3-0 on the season. They do score 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to kind of pull away. But, Joe, Washington is probably the team that I've been impressed with the most in this conference that nobody is talking about. They have a fun offense with all players who have been there before. Damon Williams is really fun. Boston is really good. And Washington State is homeless from a conference point of view in the Pac-2. But this is a game that is a rivalry game. I don't think people expected it to be this much. I think they were 20-point favorites, but Washington, I do think, made a statement here.
Yeah, I think they were embarrassed from last year. I know that was totally different players, different quarterback and Will Rogers, but I think they sent a message going up 59-24. I don't think there was any mercy by Jed Fish. As to why that happened, I'd have to ask more of the Washington fan base, as we're not as well versed here in the state of Michigan, into why that score was run up or whatnot. One thing I'll tell you just before I get right back to the game is it kind of speaks to the modern landscape of college football. 3 years ago, Oregon State beat Oregon, even last year, Washington State beat a rebuilding Washington team. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon, barring anything colossal. Getting back to the game, though, Sean, I always ranked Washington in my college football playoff for a reason. I think that trio is really, really good. I think you can criticize their defense. I think there is vulnerability on the run D, kind of like what I've been saying for Oregon to people in private, and kind of been hinting at it here before they play a real opponent. One thing they're really good at is they're pressuring the quarterback. I think they're first or second in pressure rates, being like 40, I think 55%. So that's something to pay attention to. I'm not going to weigh into it too heavy, even though I want Washington to be good for my narrative. I think they've played 4 opponents that they're completely overmatched by. I mean, that they completely overwhelm. Certainly, we'll find out how much is true and how much isn't true this Saturday. So I don't want to comment too much on that, Sean, but I just think Washington objectively has a really good offense. Defense does a lot of things well. I don't know if the unit's all that great, but we're going to find out sooner than later.
Yeah, they are one of the few. Penn State, and UCLA have not played a Big Ten opponent yet. Off the top of my head, there might be more. But Minnesota and Ohio State also. But they they've passed the test so far. They're fun. They still have they haven't lost at home since 2023. They're just a good football team. And
2021, actually,
2021,
Sean.
2021, they they're going to win games at home, and their Week 5 game we'll talk about in the next video. But I think they're really close to being in my top 25. I think I just needed to see it against a conference opponent, but they certainly have the jump pad here, Joe, to do exactly what you're predicting. Now a lot has to go right, but they're fun to watch. They haven't played. This was their biggest game so far, and this was sort of thrown in the middle of a pretty good slate. So I didn't see every play, but I flip to it every so often, and I think they're ready to make a statement this weekend, and I'll save some of that for the Week 5 preview. But Washington 59, Washington State 24, impressive from the Huskies here as they look to announce themselves in the Big Ten. It's sort of funny how it's turning out that they were sort of thrown in with the LA teams to join the Big Ten, and they are the two that are carrying the torch in football, at least through 1.25 years of this new realignment. But that's it for our Week 4 recap. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.